Disclaimer: all views expressed on What Makes Us Fire are solely those of the person or persons giving them. What Makes Us Fire does not represent or claim to represent any particular city or fire department, and therefore make the claim that all views and standpoints are affiliated with What Makes Us Fire and with What Makes Us Fire only. Any mention of certain fire departments or cities within the interviews are solely for informational and opinion-based dialogue. In short, if you have a problem with what's published, just say something about it and don't be a Richard.
What is up, What Makes Us Fire family? Thank you for joining us on this episode of the What Makes Us Fire podcast. Today, I have a pretty cool guest on who's a retired firefighter. His name is Mr. Brett Snow. Brett has some extensive knowledge. He actually has a bachelor's in mental health science, but on top of that, he has a Ph.D. in ministry. And what's cool about him is he's found a way to tie both faith and science to find a better way for civil service personnel to get mental health help. He has found a correlation between faith and having a mental health disorder, on top of being able to explain it through science. It's pretty interesting to hear. You guys sit back and listen to his story. Find out how he got to this path in life and why he decided to continue this path after his retirement. He is doing something because he believes in it. And I can't wait for you guys to hear all about it. It's one of the longest episodes. I hope you stick through, and if you can't listen all the way through, whenever you have the chance, just keep listening. Listen all the way through. You're going to learn something. What Makes Us Fire family? Please, let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Brett Snow. Other than that, we just talking bullshit the whole time.
Right.
And you know what? I think you are actually the and no offense or anything, I think you're the oldest firefighter or previous firefighter I've had on the show so far.
Okay.
The fact that you're retired, you're the first retired firefighter I have had on the show. And, I think that's kind of awesome because I want to get that point of view, kind of like, what is it like to no longer have to do that every day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
But Brett, man, I'm sorry. I started recording.
Yep.
Just so I want to say thank you so much for coming on to What Makes Us Fire. It's been a little bit of a crazy ride trying to get you on.
Yeah.
You've been pretty busy the last few weeks.
It has been. Yeah. You know what? To Josh, I want to say thank you for having me on. I mean, it's a great, it's a great privilege. I feel it's an honor to do that. I think what you do is a great thing. Getting the word out there and helping as many people as you can. But it has been a wild ride. We just made it to Siesta Key. Just moved here, and we haven't been here but maybe 14 days. And I picked up from Chicago. I retired. My last day on paper with the city of Chicago was October 24th, my birthday. I turned 50. I retired at the same day, and that same day we drove to Florida. So it was like there was no waiting around.
You literally did the quintessential retirement thing in moving to Florida. Hey, but you know what? You know what? Being 50 years old and retiring is actually, I think, is a really good age. If you're able to retire that young, because it's still a fairly young age to be retired from a career, that's actually really good. And that I like anybody out there, all the young guns, like that's what you want to strive for. You want to be able to retire at, early 50s, late 40s if you can, but early 50s for sure. If you can accomplish that, you'll be able to, enjoy the rest of your life and whatever you want to do.
Yeah, and that's important. I think also too, it's also important to have something to do, something to maybe occupy yourself, have an interest, have a goal, or even have a part-time job, post-retirement, career, if you want to call it that, which I do, running the ministry, which gives you something to do. And I can tell you, just within the last 14 days, which is a very short experience, short span, I can see how when people retire and they don't have anything going, or they don't really have any direction, I can see how they can slip into depression or slip into some sort of an isolation, because you're used to having some sense of worth, some sense of um,
Routine.
responsibility
Routine.
and
Yeah.
routine. Yeah, and so when that goes away, you're kind of almost you're floating around in a boat without a paddle. You don't really know, you don't really have any direction. You're just kind of going all over the place, you know. And so I found that just within the last 2 weeks, but I've been occupied, getting house set, getting stuff that we don't have, buying kayaks, buying bikes. We had to buy a car when we got here, so I've been occupied doing those kind of things. So
Well, it sounds like a good thing to be occupying your time with.
Yeah.
You get that fat right off the bat, retirement check, spend a little bit of money,
Yeah.
and then coast on in from there.
Right.
But I'm sorry, I'm going to back up a little bit. I'd like to let my audience know a little bit about who you are. Obviously, we know you have just retired from Chicago area fire department.
Yeah.
But have you always grown up in that area? Where did you grow up? What's your background? Where did the mind of Mr. Brett Snow come from?
Yeah, I could tell you. It started for me. The direction in the fire service started in high school, and my whole life as a child growing up, I had an interest in military. And I had an uncle that was killed when he was going through Green Beret training. And I loved being in the timbers. We used to always go in the timbers. I used to always paint my face and build things. And I love fishing. And so I grew up in the country in south of Bloomington Normal in Illinois. And so I grew up there, and we just had, to walk out the back door, we had, sky was the limit. We just had acres upon acres. And so that's how I lived. That's how I lived my life. And so in high school, I started having a seizure disorder, and halfway through high school, and they didn't know what it was from. They didn't know if I had a brain tumor that they couldn't find. They didn't know what the reasons were before, with the seizures. And so they kept looking and looking, and then I was put on medication. They had to, work on finding a therapeutic dose. And then senior year came around, and I was still on it. Well, because of that, I couldn't go in the military. So I had a few of my friends join the military. And so I couldn't join the military because of that. It absolutely crushed me. So I went into a tailspin. I gave up on school. I started boozing. I started basically giving up, and I was upset. I was upset at the world, and I started going down a bad path. And on my dad's side of the family, it wasn't uncommon. It wasn't unfamiliar for us to have a relative in the prison system. And so I had a grandfather that was in and out. I have an uncle who's in there still, and so even my own parents, but including myself, felt that that was the direction I was going, and it scared them for sure. And so late in my senior year, I just happened to take this assessment, like a career assessment, like a vocational assessment. And it read, the measurement came out as being qualified or good for fire service, or being an EMT. And so I'm like, okay, I could try that. And so I signed up for EMT school right out of high school. I went to EMT school, and then joined the volunteer fire department, and I just fell in love with it. And so what drugged me, what lifted me out of that dark valley at that moment, at that time, one, I certainly believe it was divine, but I didn't recognize that at the time, nor did I give it any credit. But the fire service was to me was the next best thing to be in special forces, and that's what I wanted to do. And I found that I had an interest in it. I had a passion for it, and I had a cousin of mine that was a paramedic in Las Vegas. And so I went on to paramedic school, went out there and lived with him for 6 months, trained with him, then came back and worked as a medic in Champaign. And then I was there for 3 years, and then I moved up into the Chicago suburb area and got on a department there. And I worked from there in the suburbs from 2000 or from 93 to 2000. And 2000 is when I got on the Chicago Fire Department. So, but I can say that the fire service to me really gave me a direction in life and probably kept me from winding up in the prison system. And I certainly and for that reason, even for me today, it's a driving force for me to give back to it. And so I started Chicago in 2000, and it was a great ride. I mean, it was something I always wanted to do. I wanted to stay busy, and I was fortunate enough to be assigned to one of the some of the busiest areas in the nation. And then I found myself on getting assigned to a squad, which is certainly heavy rescue, and we went to we covered about 35 firehouses. And
oh wow! So
yeah,
it was a regional squad.
Yeah, it's huge. And so we were going to a ton of fires, and I just got a ton of experience, and I was very fortunate for that. And then I left there, went to another engine in Roseland, which is one of the most violent areas in the country, and I had a good time there. Got to meet some of the good firemen. I liked moving around because I liked to experience different perspectives and tactics and get to know more people and things like that. So I liked moving around. And then and so after doing that, then I came to soon as I left the squad, went to this other engine. Then I went through a divorce, and so and I'm certain we'll probably talk about it later, is throughout my fire service career, I certainly conformed. I conformed to the way of life. I conformed to the partying. I conformed to the running around, the promiscuity, and I just conformed to it, and it became it ran my life, and I identified with all of it, which drug me through 3 divorces. And
would you say that lifestyle was a contributing factor to?
I do, because when I started, I couldn't get enough of it, and so then I found myself working for 2 departments, teaching, going to school, and so I was so driven to know and understand this job the best that I could, that I couldn't get enough of it, and so it pulled me away from family life. And I can see that happening to a lot of people that I know today.
Well, yeah, being with firefighter or civil servant really in general, but firefighter especially, is extremely difficult in that the schedule is all wonky. It's crazy to begin with. There's a lot of alone time for the spouse, and then it's hard for them to really understand. Like my wife said it, she goes, at one point in time, I never understood why you were so gung-ho and wanting to go help other people at this job when we needed help here at home.
Sure.
And that it hit me, because I was just like, well, you should know that I want to help here at home far more than going to the job. However, somebody needs to do the job. And if, it's not me and my brothers and sisters, then who else is going to do it? Not to mention, if say I'm not around or something happens to me, I want to be a part of the brotherhood that if something happens to you guys when I'm not around, that firefighter, that EMT, that cop is going to do anything and everything that they can for you. And for me in my head is, if I can provide that for other people, the people that are going to provide it for my family, hopefully, and I truly believe this, are going to give it their all, just like I would for their family.
Right.
Right. And so when I
Yeah.
explained it to her that way, then she kind of understood a little bit, but it's hard for spouses to
Uh-huh.
really understand the lifestyle of a firefighter
Right.
starting off.
Yeah.
New relationships with firefighters or civil service personnel, it's difficult. And it's difficult for both, because the civil service employee, the firefighter, now has to learn how to balance the fire life with the home life. And it's difficult because the fire life almost feels like home life. It's your second home. It really
Yes.
is.
Right.
And you become so involved with these brothers and sisters, and then you bring it home and you talk about it and you want your family involved in it, but your family also wants to be their own thing too.
Right.
They didn't
Right.
ask to be drug into it. It's a difficult balance.
No, it's really hard. And the other thing too is, when what I found to be easy was when I came home. Sometimes my home life was so it was so
Chaotic.
well, it was chaotic, but it was just because I was so driven, and so my priorities were so driven and shifted towards a fire service. um, I started not even really understanding my home life. And so it got to the point where I wasn't able to communicate. It was easier for me to, when I got home, if there was any kind of an argument, any kind of a disagreement, what did I do? I did one of two things. I called buddies, went out for some drinks, or I looked at a schedule and picked up an overtime shift, or picked up another work day at another fire department, because it was easier for me to just go than to stay home and deal with it. Um,
Yeah, for
because
everybody that can't see me right now, I am shaking my head like, yes, yes, I know
yes,
exactly what you're talking about.
right. It's just easier. It's easier to say, okay, all right, I'm out of here. I'm going to go work, because you are then now removing yourself from a situation that is bothersome, and then you are removing that stress, and you're going to a place that you feel comfortable with, that you relate to, whether it's a coworker or whatever the case is. You are leaving what you don't really understand and you can't fix, to what you can fix, and into an area that you are comfortable.
We are transferring the stress to a stress we feel like we can manage, to a stress to where we feel like we can't.
Right.
And it's
Right.
so weird that we find it easier to handle the stresses of the job than it is to handle the stresses of home.
Right.
Sometimes it's
Yeah.
so it's weird when people hear that. It was like, well, here's the thing. I've been trained to handle the stresses of the job. I've been trained to handle a bad call. I've been trained to handle, a fire in a building, or
Hmm.
pulling out a person, or doing CPR. I've been trained in all that. These are all stresses that I've been trained to deal with. Nobody trained me on how to deal with a pissed off wife.
Yes.
And so
Right.
it's
Yeah.
easier to be at the job. It
Hmm.
sometimes it is. And it's not to say that the family's not any less important. It's just, when we don't know how to deal, we human beings want to go to the comfortable space. We
Right.
want to feel comfortable. So we'll put ourselves in a situation to where, even if it is stressful, the fact that we know how to deal with those stresses is more comfortable than having to try to deal with stresses that we don't know how to deal with.
Yes. Right. And so
And
what I later learned, and which took me a long time, it took me over 20 years to really realize the fact that we're not the only ones that are stressed out. We're not the only ones that experience emotional ups and downs and emotional separation. So do they. And
mhm.
that is that's why I put together a presentation for that specific reason. Is it's created for both the first responder and the spouses and significant others, because it's like putting new tires on your car and only realigning one side. You're still going to be out of balance. And so they are also a significant part of life over the fire service. They really are. They need to understand it.
Absolutely.
Plus, we need to understand what they're going through. We come home, we're
Absolutely.
tired, right? We're tired, we're exhausted. We don't want to be bothered. We need to decompress. We don't want to be bothered with her being up, at night because the baby was crying, or the diapers need to be changed, or we need to, the car needs to be fixed, or whatever the case is. We come in, we don't want to be bothered with it, but at the same time, they've been handling it for 24 hours.
Yeah, they don't want to be bothered with it either.
Right.
And it's so cool that you're saying this, because I actually had that's part of my idea with the show. Is I want to get the perspectives from the wives, the spouses, the husbands, the wives, but even more so the kids, and then just friends of firefighters that are not connected to the civil service. Like, the only way they're connected is through us as friends.
Yes.
And we forget, as civil services, firefighters, as first responders, that sometimes when we decide to unload, when we decide to talk about it, we don't think about how they are dealing with us being in the job. We think about how we're dealing with the job. We come home, we don't want to deal with the stresses. You should understand. I just had a really shitty day. I had to do CPR on a kid. I don't want to talk right now. Well, to them, they're like, okay, but that's part of your job. You still have your home life here to take care of too. So how do you balance that? It's hard. It
is
huge learning
right.
process. And then you have to be okay with allowing them to be upset with you, because they're still upset with the same things you don't want to deal with at home. They don't want to deal with at home either, especially if you have a working spouse. They got to go to work too, and then they got to take care of everything at home. And then when you come home, you're like, well, I just got done working, I don't want to take care of anything at home. Well, neither do they.
Sure.
It's hard to understand that sometimes, because this feeling of it's hard to explain. But yeah, that's part of what I wanted to share. I wanted to get that perspective. And I have a couple of people on. I even have a father of a firefighter, and got his perspective. His family had no civil service in it whatsoever. His son was the first civil service, person, firefighter, to be in the family. And so getting his perspective and what it was like, and how they dealt with the idea of their son becoming a firefighter is actually really interesting to hear, because we don't ever hear those stories. We don't hear the stresses that they go through, the ideas that they go through, the feelings and emotions of having someone they love decide to do a job like this, and top of a spouse now that is with somebody that just starts in the fire service or gets involved with the firefighter. Even though they think it's this Hollywood idea of being with a man in uniform or woman in uniform, a firefighter or whatever, they have this Hollywood idea, and then when they get into it, they're like, holy fuck, it's nothing like what I thought it was going to be. Way more stressful than anybody thought. It's not this romanticized idea of, you're with a firefighter. It's not the hero syndrome anymore. It's nothing like that. And so the fact that you're saying all this, and the fact that you did a study on it and you created something for people like that, I think is amazing, because we need to hear those stories. As firefighters and civil service members, we need to understand what we're putting on the people in our lives, as well as them understanding what's being put on us. It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
Two-way street.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, you can't uncouple it. You can't uncouple personal life and the fire service as much as we want to try, as much as we think we can. We just can't do it, because you have to be able to learn how to live with it together. Because it is together. It is life over the fire service. I mean, that's what it is. Learning and trying to understand, I call emotional pliability, where, as you were saying too, it's we're trained to do things. Sometimes where we have the fear trained out of us. We go to fires. A lot of that has to do with awareness and understanding and making judgment calls, and doing risk assessments, and helps us actually work through some of these dangers and get past that point where we want to turn around, but we keep going. But at the same time, when you look at trauma, kids killed, or we're dragging kids out of the fire, whatever the case is, that may be traumatic. We're certainly well designed to where we separate our emotions, and we learn to separate our emotions from what's going on at hand, so that we can function, so that we can get through the task, perform the task. If we were emotionally driven at that point, most of us would be immobilized, and we wouldn't be able to do it. And so then, after the call, after the incident, after you start winding down, your catecholamines and your epinephrine and all that stuff starts to kind of settle down, then we have to learn to recalibrate, reattach our emotions with what's happening, with which is the here and now. And that becomes difficult, especially when you are on a busy company, because you don't have time to do that. You're going to the next run, you're going to the next call. You may have just pulled a kid out of this fire here, and now you're going to another one. Not really having time to process it. You just keep going and keep going. And then at the same time, now you got to take these emotions, which are needed at home, and you go home and something's happened. Your kid skins the knee, something is happening with the wife, some sort of an incident or a situation that requires your emotional presence. We have a hard time, because what happens in the fire service, we develop an automatic emotional separation, like a reflex. And so now when you're at home, that reflex kicks in, and then now to your family, you seem to them disconnected and unemotional.
And the way I've explained it before, and I know exactly what you're talking about, and it sounds bad when I say it, because I can't. The best words that I can put it into is, we're human beings, and we have all the emotions, and we try to balance and understand what's going on with our emotions in our head in between the calls. But as soon as that tone hits, we get this excitement, the adrenaline dump, everything starts happening. And then once those doors open on scene, it's almost like we have to dehumanize not only ourselves, but the victim. If there is a victim, we have to dehumanize it, right? There's somebody trapped in a car. Well, now it's a job. It's not, holy shit, we got to get this person out of the car, they're hurt really bad. It's, okay, how are they hurt? This is what I need to do to fix it. This is where I need to cut to get them out. This is what I need to do to make sure that this body doesn't get hurt anymore, or, distraught anymore. The screaming and the crying and the calls for help, we got to ignore and just continue doing the job. It is a job. And for some reason, for a lot of us, we're able to snap out of this human emotion, where if it was, and you see it, especially if there's bystanders and they're hearing these screams for help and stuff like that, you see them, they're in panic, yeah. They're crying, they're doing stuff that might harm them because they want to help. They don't have that disconnect that we've been, right. We have been trained to do it. It becomes a job. We dehumanize the situation to get the job done. That victim, that situation becomes a job. And then once it's all said and done, the rig's loaded back up, we all hop back in the truck, and then it's like, okay, let's reevaluate what happened. And sometimes when we do that, it's almost like a kick in the nuts, because we're like, holy fuck, holy damn, what the hell just happened? God, I hope they're going to be okay. God, oh my God, what happened? But during that time, none of these thoughts are running through your mind. None of those thoughts. It's all, it's all job related. It's all step processes in our head that we do. And then when we come home, like you said, and that was one of my issues with my family is I started to just, when something happened, I would react. I would
Mm,
react like I would on the job.
right.
It's an automatic reaction, and I couldn't separate what I did on the job with what I did at home.
Hmm.
And, it became an issue in that sometimes I would react so cold-heartedly because
Hmm.
that's what it is. It's a cold-hearted
Right.
reaction because I have to be cold-hearted. I can't let my emotions get in the way. But I would react so cold-heartedly, it was misconstrued as me not caring or
Yes.
me not
Right.
not showing love or affection. It was just me reacting because that's
Yeah.
just how my body has been trained, my mind has been
Hmm.
trained to deal with emotional stresses, whether it be at home or at work. And it takes work to be able to separate the two
Hmm.
because you don't want to react emotional like you would at home on the job. You can't afford to. You really can't. It can put you and your brothers and sisters in a situation that can become detrimental to everybody, including the person you're trying to help.
Yeah. Yeah. So we learn to be task oriented, task driven in the fire service, but then when you get home, we're needed to be emotionally driven, and it right away separates, right? And
Hmm.
so we spend so much time being task driven and setting aside our emotions, but then when you get home, it's just like we were saying, it's an automatic thing. You set down the emotions. Okay, what do we need? And then you have like a flat affect. You're disconnected. You're not there emotionally, and but at the same time, we don't realize that. And so that's something that's extremely important to talk about with your spouses and your family, is so that they understand that. It's not that I don't care. It's not I'm not compassionate or passionate. It's just that um, I have learned over the years to separate that in order for me to function. And so that's what happens. It's a reflex.
It's weird how the emotional stress is like for us, the emotional stress is a child drowning, a victim
Hmm.
trapped in a car. And then when we come home, the emotional stress is you didn't do the dishes or there's laundry not done. But the fact there's no separation, it's still an emotional stress. And we
Yeah.
can't and so the disconnect happens the same for
Yeah.
both, even though they're not in any way closely related situational wise.
Yeah.
The fact that there's an emotional stress tied to it, our
Yeah.
reactions the same.
Sure.
And it's hard for spouses to understand that. It's hard for first responders to be able to separate, and it
Hmm.
takes time, it takes learning. When did you decide to start really diving into the science behind all that and trying to put that information out there?
Yeah.
At what point were you what point, what was it that clicked that was just like, you know what, hey, this is something that needs to be addressed, let me start doing some research and putting the information out? When did that happen for you?
It started when I was still in the suburbs, and I was going to school for behavioral science because I knew there was a need for it. There was a need for helping members that were addicted to alcohol or drugs. Um,
What drove you
and,
to do that? What drove you to
um,
start doing that, I guess, is where
yeah,
I'm going
just
for.
seeing coworkers fallen, seeing coworkers lose their jobs because of it, and so I knew that I wanted to continue to go to school. I wanted to get a degree. Man, I was just trying to go through my mind. I was actually heading to I was wanting to go to med school, and I just didn't have the money to do it. It just wasn't going to happen. Um, so I just found myself studying behavior, and I loved it. And I knew that there at some point in time there was going to be a need for it. At the time, I really didn't know what I was going to do with it. You know what I mean? But I had a passion for it, and so part of that, my undergrad was addictions counseling and understanding, just understanding behavioral science to begin with. And so once I finished that degree, um, I kind of set it down for a while, and was still teaching fire service. I was still teaching at academies outside of Chicago, and I still had a passion for that. I was driven to share lessons learned, close calls of being killed, actually being on scene where guys were almost killed, and losing a good friend of mine on the same day on a line of duty death where I carried survival's guilt, and that was the beginning of it. Where I worked on a department outside Chicago. I was doing 48s, and he was also in Chicago too. He was a paramedic. He wasn't a fireman with the city yet, but him and I worked at this small town Stone Park Fire Department, and him and I worked together for 3 years, and we were having a good time that day. And when I would leave to go to school, he would jump up in the front seat until I got back. I'd be gone for maybe 2 hours or so, and the call came in for an alley garage, but I had already left. I'd been gone for maybe 20 minutes, and a call came in for an alley garage, and well, he jumps up front, and they pull out. Well, he ended up T-boning another neighboring department. Their engines T-boned at a major intersection. It killed him. And I get to school, and I get this phone call because I had left my stuff still on the rig, and my gear was all over the street. And so they thought I was under the engine, the people they were trying to. And so I get this phone call, and like, oh my gosh, where are you at? And this and that. And so I left school and came back. And so that was a beginning point for me, trying to deal with survival's guilt. And I carried that for a long time, and it bothered me, and it actually changed my whole perspective in the fire service. And that was a fork in the road for me.
Did you, obviously, it sounds like you wanted to understand yourself and everything else a little bit more, and that's what drove you to go through that course of action in school.
Yes,
but
right.
Outside of that, did you seek any help, therapy, counseling, anything like that as well?
Yeah, I was having trouble for a while, not really realizing what the trouble was, emotionally and temper-wise. I had temper, and I can tell you this: I was crying all the time, and I was thinking about him, and I was trying to get past the whole "why me?" Why did it happen 20 minutes after I left instead of 20 minutes before? And so I actually wound up finally talking to our department's chaplain, and I just didn't have anywhere else to go. I didn't want to talk to anyone that didn't understand the fire service, and he had been around for years, and he was great to talk to.
I know exactly what you mean about that. Yeah. God, that is such a hard thing to explain to people when you're looking for help. It was hard for me to explain it to my wife, actually, that I wanted to find somebody that understood the fire service, that understood the civil service, and not just some other therapist. Not saying that another therapist couldn't help. It just didn't feel like they completely understood.
Sure.
So finding somebody that really kind of understood the service and understood the stresses made it feel better to talk to somebody about.
Yes. And, and he helped me put things in perspective and understand. And that's what I carry today in the ministry when I do counseling is we're not designed to carry our yesterdays. And God doesn't want us to carry guilt and have guilt and to feel responsible for what happened yesterday. And I had no control over it. And if we realize the fact that if we sit here and think, well, if I was still there, they wouldn't happen. The truth of the matter is we don't know that. We don't know that circumstances would have been different. We don't know that we would have taken the same route, or we would have turned right instead of went straight. We don't know what the circumstances would have been. And just because I would have been there doesn't mean that the outcome would have been different. We don't know. We don't know why it happened. There's that belief that was God's plan. I don't truly believe that. I think that if it's his time, it's his time. But we also have responsibility to make decisions. and which is why we are given scripture, which is why we are giving directions and things to follow, is because we are given the free will to make decisions. So one thing that didn't happen, that Jeff did not do, is he didn't put a seatbelt on. Right. So that very thing could have completely changed the outcome altogether. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So to sit here and say, well, that was God's plan. Well, no, because he also instructs us to do the right thing, to do what we're supposed to do, and to know that there are consequences to our actions. And that may very well have been a consequence to his inaction of not wearing a seatbelt. And so I talk about seatbelts a lot. I advocate those kind of things. But then moving forward, I was able to set down that guilt. I was able to walk away from it. I was able to rise above it, and I no longer carried it. I no longer felt responsible for it. But what I do is I make sure that that I'm living a life that's worthy of it. You know what I mean? So
living a life that's worthy of the time that was given to you. You feel like,
yes.
I know exactly. I can get that sentiment.
Yeah.
We fall sometimes, especially with survivor's guilt, we fall sometimes into what I like to call the what if syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And we will kill ourselves with, what if I did this? What if I did that? What if I didn't do this? What if I would have done that? And the what ifs are just that, what ifs.
Yeah.
They aren't true. They aren't what happened. They aren't what would have happened, because it already happened.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to understand something that doesn't make sense to us. And when we do that, we fight this idea in our head that we could have made a difference. Like, we always want to feel like we could have made a difference. We want to feel like my actions could have stopped this. My actions could have done something. If I wouldn't have done something, that the inaction is an action to maybe have stopped something bad from happening. And the fact that you were able to find your path and your way out of that survivor's guilt is amazing.
Yeah.
I guarantee you it probably wasn't easy at all.
No, you know what? It wasn't, and it wasn't easy. And I could tell you too. I started even having these. I started even having these behaviors and thoughts, and a lot of it is centered on our belief system. I started having a hard time having fun at the firehouse because we were having a good time, Josh. We were having a blast. And so immediately after that happened, and over a course of time, my whole attitude at a firehouse changed. I stopped. I don't want to say I stopped having fun or enjoying myself, because we had fun at the firehouse, but I started taking it more seriously, and that was a turning point for me. Is I started buckling down and realizing, wow, this is real. This isn't something you just read in a magazine. This job can kill you. And so that's kind of where I turned, I got deeper into training, or teaching. Is I thought it was important, and I felt it was important to help others realize that we can't stop learning in this job, and that the where you want to be and continue to strive to be and stay is, you want to be hard to kill on this job. And the only way to do that is through experience and learning from your mistakes, lessons learned, and learning from others. And so that's been my big push in the fire service, is to be hard to kill. And so with that, also comes the realization that this job can take your life. And so then compounding that, now you start realizing, and especially the older you get, the more family responsibilities you have. You start realizing, and I learned this when I was at squad too, because we went to a crap load of fires, a lot of close calls, a lot of collapses, realizing just how quick this job can take your life. Adds to the stress of it, right? Adds to the stress of the possibility of getting killed. I find that in itself becomes a constant stressor as a first responder. Is when you leave to go home, and I caught myself, I found myself doing it just automatically. I would open the door to my boy's bedroom and look at him, thinking that and realizing that could be the last time, because we know how easy it is to get killed in this job. So I started taking it more seriously. And then, moving forward, reaching a point where I don't really know exactly the cause. It's really hard to understand the cause of my last divorce, but a lot of it had to do with just differences in priorities. My priority, like I was telling you earlier, shifted to the fire service. I was just entrenched. I was ingrained in learning this job, so I can help others survive the fire ground, and teaching and this and that. And I started drifting away from my home life. So she, my ex, the boy's mother, started going her own direction, and then it later came to a point where she didn't want this life anymore, and there was nothing I could do about it. I couldn't hang on to it. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't change it, and I was basically losing control. And that's another thing that, as a fireman, for me, a first responder, I liked feeling like I had control of things, whether it was on the fire ground, feeling like that I had control on what I did tactically, what I'm going to do, what I didn't do, when and when not to break these windows, those kind of things, and feeling like I had to control the outcome. I had to control of whether or not this was going to flash over, or whether or not the floor was going to collapse, and those kind of things. I felt like we had control over that, even EMS too, right? So being able to control the situation with Narcan, getting IVs, intubating, doing all those kind of things, feeling like you have control of the situation. But then my family life was falling apart, and I felt like it was slipping through my hands, and I just didn't have control of it. I couldn't stop it, and it's put me into a tailspin. And two things were happening. One is I felt like I was losing everything I worked for. I was becoming a very hands-on, full-time dad to a part-time dad, which is not why I had kids to begin with. So that was an added stress. And then feeling like I was going to lose, part of my retirement, which was the main reason that I worked for City of Chicago. I wanted to do 20 years and out. And I felt like that was falling apart. And so I was just losing everything in my life. Everything was just crumbling. And so I really didn't know how to handle it. Didn't know what to do with it. And again, so, I turned to booze, turned to separating myself from it. It was easier for me to pick up again overtime. It was easier for me to just pick up work shifts and to separate myself from it, because I couldn't fix it.
Right.
And then I got to the point where, I started seeing multiple different kinds of therapy, whether it was, seeing a counselor, going to a hypnotist, doing all these other kind of things, because I didn't even know how to fix myself. I didn't know why I was responding the way I was. And to even take it a little bit further and deeper is my current wife right now. I had dated 25 years ago, and we reconnected, and it was she was godsend, and her and I hit it off really well. She kind of came into a very dark time in my life, and she helped me through this. And one of the things that what I really realized was how much stress can actually affect you physically. And so it was even, Josh, it was affecting me physically. I was losing bone mass, muscle mass. My cortisol levels were probably skyrocketing, which actually causes that. It causes metabolic changes in your bone and muscle for energy used for stress response. And I couldn't keep weight on. My stomach was always bothered. It was always upset. And a lot of it had to do with fighting court battles, trying to hang on to everything that I worked for, trying to keep as much time with the boys that I could, and try to soften their blow, soften their fall, because they didn't ask for that. And one of the things that I experienced, and I'm sharing this because I know I'm not the only one, is it went as far, Josh, as it affected my romantic life. I experienced EMD, erectile dysfunction, or ED, and it literally just destroyed me because, again, I didn't have control over it. I didn't know what was happening, what was wrong with me, and I went to see hypnotherapist about that. Did nothing. Went to see other therapists. Did nothing for me. And I was taking Xanax to try to calm down. I was waking up with nightmares, night terrors, waking up with sweats, and even the mere thought of having a romantic interaction with her would throw me into a epinephrine response, right? So I would have a high heart rate, my blood pressure would jump, and I would start to sweat. I would get anxious, and just a mere thought of that was causing problems, and it was all compounded because of the other things that were going on. So here I am. I'm trying the blue pill to see, if this is, is this truly a physical thing that I'm getting older? Is this something I'm just going to have to be faced with? And then eventually, we kind of worked through it, and that took some time. And then on top of all this, Josh, I know I'm talking a lot, but on top of all this, then now we climb into, I get called for promotion, to get called to be a lieutenant. And that is an absolute last thing that I needed to do. Nor I was not in the place, or in the frame of mind to be an officer, to be a leader. I was still trying to fix myself. I was crumbling, so I finally took it and, went through the program and, I got promoted, and here I am, I'm out in the streets, still stressed out, still trying to figure this out. And it got to the point, Josh, where we got sent to a fire, and I was detailed to this truck that covered part of Roseland, which is a pretty busy area, and then part of where, my neighborhood. And I was in the front seat, and we were out on the street, and we come back to call us on the radio for a fire, for a still alarm fire run on Drake Avenue. And I'm thinking to myself, why does that street sound familiar? And I couldn't, if you were to ask me to drive there at that moment, I couldn't even tell you if it was east of here, west of there, where the street was. And it wasn't until, luckily, the driver knew where he was going. It wasn't until we pulled onto that street, Drake Avenue, that I realized that's where I live. I live on this street.
Oh, wow.
So that fire call was 4 houses away from my address. I couldn't figure it out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that was a wake-up call for me. And so I had to separate myself from the streets so I could recalibrate my thoughts, kind of reset myself. And while I was down there, I found myself being drawn to study cancer biology. Our union was doing something with cancer sniffing dogs, and so I started studying cancer. While I was doing that, my wife and I started going to church. very regularly.
Can I stop you
Yep.
for 1 second?
Yeah.
I want to dive in a little bit more into how the stresses at home affected you at work.
Yes. Okay.
The reason why I want to get into it is because we always hear, and we talked about this on the phone yesterday, about how that saying, leave your stresses at the door whenever you come into work, right?
Yeah.
Whatever's going on at home, leave it at the door. This is your job. This is what you got to worry about now.
Yeah.
And then we're told, some of us are told, and a lot of us are told, leave the stresses of the job at the job and don't bring them home.
Right.
And I think those are very detrimental sayings to people that deal with stresses on a day-to-day basis.
Sure.
We're human beings. Human beings cannot just shut off the stresses that are going on in their heads.
Right.
They're chemical reactions. We can't sometimes control those chemical releases that make us feel those stresses, the depressions, the anxieties, all of it, the PTSDs, the survivor guilt. We cannot just leave them at the door. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
The human body, the human mind does not work that way. So when we tell somebody, hey, leave what's going on at home at the door, it sounds like to them, hey, whatever you're going through doesn't fucking matter. This matters more.
Right.
And then whenever you come home and you have a family member say, hey, I don't want to hear about it. You decided to do this job, leave your stresses of the job at the job. It's like, well, now you're being told all the stresses you go through at work don't matter. We matter more. And it's almost like you're being told you don't matter. How you feel doesn't matter. What you have to do matters more. And that's not the case, because we can't do anything if we're not working right, if we are not right. If our mental health is in a state of depression or stress or anxiety, how are we supposed to function as just a human being? How are we supposed to function and do normal things, let alone the things that require even more emotional input than others?
Right.
We can't. And so I think that saying of leave the stresses at the door, leave this at the door, that's a horrible saying. Instead, why don't we say, hey, you know what? Why don't you go take care of yourself first? Let's make sure you're good, so that way when you do come to work, you're the best you that you can be. And then if you're at work and something happens, hey, let's get this CISD done, this critical incident stress debriefing. Let's get this done and see if you're going to need a little bit of help. That way it doesn't affect you on the job or at home too. Why don't we say these type of things instead of, just deal with it or just leave it at the door, forget about it? Why do we do that in this job? I think it is changing. I really do. I do see a change. However, there's still this idea and stigma tied to a lot of first responder, civil service, and even general public have this idea that we should be able to do this thing where we can just detach. And that you can't ask any human being to do that. It's not, we're not programmed like that. That's not how we are designed to work. It doesn't work like that. You'd have to be a sociopath to be able to do something like that.
Right. Well, especially too, Josh, when a lot of it depends on, well, what is the factor? What are the factors? What is actually going on? What is the stress happening in your life? It's different than deciding what color to paint the room, and have an argument about it, and then going to work, versus actually having your life, being pulled out from underneath you and everything you worked for crumbling.
But our minds can't differentiate those things. Our minds really can't. Our minds, it's the same chemicals being released over the argument about the paint and the feeling like everything's falling out from underneath you. Those chemicals are the same. Your brain doesn't know the difference. Your brain just feels stress, period. End of story. That's it. Those are the stresses. Now, can one cause more stress than the other? Sure, absolutely. However, your brain still feels the stress.
Mhm.
It's the stress that your brain feels. And so to be able to say you should be able to just forget about it or
Mhm.
differentiate doesn't work that way,
Yeah.
because you're still upset about the fight. You're still upset about the possibility of losing things. You're still upset. Your mind is in that state.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying one's worse or better than the
Mhm.
other. Obviously, one in general thinking would be quote unquote worse than the other. But when you
Yeah.
break it down to just a biological thing,
Mhm.
it's the chemicals in your brain, they don't know the difference. Your mind doesn't know the difference. It's that stress reaction that your mind just puts in, the chemicals in your brain just put out there, and you feel that stress.
Right. It's a severity. I like to look at it. It's the severity or caliber of the stress that matters. It's a stress that you can actually. There's one you can actually put down and forget and worry about later, and there's one you can't stop thinking about.
Correct.
And a
Yeah,
lot of
I
that
agree with that.
is,
I agree with that.
so the whole life changing situations is something you can't think about. You got bank situations, you got financial things going on. You got, okay, well, you got to find a place to live. There's just ongoing things you can't shut off. You can't stop thinking about. And so those are distractors.
Did
That
you find
in
those to be a detriment to your work?
Oh, no doubt. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I mean, I was angry all day long, Josh. I was angry.
Would you project
I,
that?
um,
I found when I was going through my depression, I projected the anger I felt within myself about myself outwards towards people. And it wasn't their
sure.
fault. It wasn't their fault. It
Hmm.
was all me. But
Right.
anything would set me off. Any little thing. If a chair was a little wonky, I remember I like picked it up and threw it. It was like, who the fuck put this damn broken chair
Right.
here? And I threw it and broke it even more. And
Sure.
it was something so small. I could have just went and it's
Yeah.
broken, move it off, got another chair. But
Yeah.
when you're in that state of mind,
Yeah.
you don't rationalize normally.
No, and your thresholds are lowered. So
Yep.
your threshold before would be, way up here, that it would take a lot for you to reach there. But now your threshold is lowered to the point where it didn't take much. It didn't take much to set you off and set me off. And I just felt myself just angry because, again, it was something that I couldn't control. I couldn't change. I didn't want to happen, especially for the kids' sake. But it was out of my control. And so I was just living in anger, and I couldn't stop it. I was just so angry. And then on top of that, I had that uncontrollable, debilitating anxiety. I had those just the uncontrolled stress response that I couldn't figure out why this was happening. And so after that, and while I was down looking at you know uh, cancer biology and wellness, I started diving a little bit more into the brain and into our nervous system and tying it into behavior and realizing that it doesn't matter how well you take care of yourself physically, uh, whether you can eat all the right foods, you can eat clean, you can exercise, you can run, um, but if you are imbalanced emotionally and spiritually, you cannot reach optimal wellness. You cannot reach optimal health because we are a triune being. And if we're not balanced in all three of these perspectives, we cannot have uh, homeostasis. You just can't. And, um, and so that drove me to learn a little bit more about that. And then, after we started going to church more and I started incorporating God in my life, and then we had just an awesome sermon one day on forgiveness. And man, I tell you that's one thing that when I talk to people who are stressed out and who are angry and who are holding on to the wrongs that happened to them, there is nothing more powerful than forgiveness. And after that sermon, I'm like, okay, this is something I got to do. I have to do it. And for me, the way I look at forgiveness is, it's not a natural thing. It's a supernatural thing. We as humans, our human nature is to hang on to grudges, to get even, to fight, to want things settled.
Retribution.
Yes. But when you're talking about forgiveness, things that really take a supernatural, take to me, a divine power to forgive, that's what it takes. And so I'm like, okay, um, I'm going to do it. And so I drove to her house and knocked on the door and just openly forgave, for destroying the family, for doing what she did. And I tell you, Josh, it was just immediately my life changed. It just changed. My stress was gone. I no longer was carrying that. Relationship between her and I were completely, instantly changed and improved. The boys' lives, their whole attitudes completely changed because they were living in that friction, and it was hurting them. And so after that moment is when I realized the power of accepting Christ in your life, and that is what drove me to pursue a Ph.D. in Christian counseling.
And I find that
Go ahead.
really, really interesting, Brett.
Uh-huh.
You have this background in science,
Yeah.
in the human mind, in the studies. And then you have this faith that is unwavering.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, the general public, they have this idea that the two, for some reason, can't coexist sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And you found a way to make it coexist, that
Sure.
you use your faith to explain the science, and then the science to explain your faith. And it is awesome to see. It's awesome to hear. There's this idea that the two can't coexist sometimes, but when you have found a way to make it coexist, you have found a way to explain it in a way that you can have the faith of Christ and God, and yet still believe that your mind works in a scientific way.
Yes.
And it's really cool to hear that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
When did you decide to become a minister with this?
I would say probably at that moment. And I was witness to the power of it. And I was witness to how I was able to achieve victory over that debilitating few years of stress and anger and things that I couldn't control. And the whole, body wasting away and didn't matter what I did and ate and just didn't change. And I wanted to then be an advocate of that. I wanted to be, I wanted to become a soldier in his army. That's what I wanted to do. So I decided to do it. And I could tell you, it wasn't easy though, Josh, because for years and years and years in the fire service, whenever we incorporated God in the fire service, it was circumstantial, and it was when there was a line of duty death, right? It was when there was a line of duty death. Then we bring God into it. Then it's a procession. Then we go to the church, and then the cemetery, and then afterwards, we put that God phone back in the shelf and shut the door, and it collects dust again. And even when you talk about anything related to religion or faith in the firehouse, it was sort of shunned. It was very foreign. And in my mind, personally, too, I lived it. I was guilty of it. I see it as a sense of weakness because over years and years and years, I felt like, where's God in all this, right? Where's God in trying to get to that 3-year-old down that's stuck in the hallway that's on fire? Where's God in this baby that just got killed in a car wreck? Where's God in and this mom were trying to peel out of the car, and she's pregnant, and her daughter's killed in the back seat. Where's God in all this? Okay, well then I'll do it, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I started getting this sense of, okay, well, if he's not going to do it, I'm going to do it. And then when we start talking about faith and all those kind of things over the years, I'm like, okay, enough, because he wasn't here yesterday, and he wasn't here on that last run we were just at. He's probably not going to be here tomorrow, and so I was guilty of it, and I see it, I see it today, and that's one of the battles I run into is there's people who absolutely don't want to hear it. There's people who are conflicted, and then there's people who crave it. And I went through all three of those, and I know what it's like. I know what it's like to not want to hear it, and then be indifferent of it, or be kind of conflicted and somewhat uncertain, and then reaching that point where there's just no other way.
Do you think maybe that sentiment comes from those old sayings that you don't talk politics or religion with people? It's just one of those things that it's a little bit taboo, that we carry that into the work, right? People always say you don't want to talk religion or politics at work.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And we hear that all the time. Not to mention the fact that the fire department is extremely diverse. So if you start talking about one certain religion, you're going to have somebody else, religion or belief system, you're going to have somebody else that has a different religion or belief system, or lack of religion or belief system, that there's going to be some pushback and some conflict. Do you think that might be a reason why, even with people that do have that faith and that belief system, why they feel like sometimes they can't really bring it into the firehouse, the home?
Sure. And I'm sure that's part of it. And we're finding too that, and I had to learn from a few, coworkers of mine who were the toughest of the tough hallway crawlers. And they actually helped lift me into fearless faith, not being afraid to talk about it, because I would have the tendency to shrink back, because when I had an opportunity to share a scripture or to bring faith into a conversation, I found myself, Josh, shrinking away, especially when I'm talking to guys I respected and I worked with for a long time and went to a ton of good fires with. I didn't want them to think that I was some sort of I didn't want them to think I was some sort of a whack job, seriously,
So you think that idea comes from, where do you think that idea comes from? I think it comes from our, what I call, our social media now, our popular idea systems that you see pushed on media. There's this idea that if you express how you feel, whether it be religiously or anything really, if you express how you feel on anything and it doesn't align with what is projected, and I want to exaggerate the word, what is projected to be the mainstream, it feels like it's almost taboo to talk about.
Yes.
And it's only a projection. It's just a projection. It's not real. It's not real. There's plenty of people that have faith and that would love to talk about it in any way, shape, or form, and at any time. But there's this projection being put out there that's very popular, that you don't talk about those things. You don't, because there's a stigma tied to those things.
Right. And I'm finding, which is a great surprise, that I'm finding more and more people that I would have never known, would have never even expected at all, who are responding to some of my posts, who are, calling me, texting me, and thanking me about it, adding their own opinions and ideas, their own scriptures, and I find it fascinating that it's almost like once you open the door, once you reveal the fact that it's okay, other people start, coming out of the closet, if you will, and start doing the same thing. And I find it fascinating.
To me, it reminds me of whenever you go through training, right? Or whenever you're in a class and the instructor stands up there and they say, there are no dumb questions. And I guarantee if you ask the question, there's probably 10 other people that had the same question. They just didn't have the balls to ask.
Sure.
And I think it falls into that line of thinking that it takes somebody that has the balls to bring it up. Really. I mean, it's like you said, it takes somebody having the strength and the willpower to put themselves out there, to allow themselves to be judged, to allow themselves to be vulnerable. Really, it takes somebody to do that, to have that strength. Even though it's a vulnerability, it's still a strength.
Yeah.
To be open, because when you do that and somebody sees that strength, it puts a sense of, oh, it's okay.
Sure.
It's okay. I can do this and not be judged by it. I can
Right.
do this and feel
Yeah.
okay with it, you know?
Sure.
And the fact that you did that for people is huge, because not a lot of people can. It takes
Right.
it takes fighting yourself a lot. And I found that doing the show, and you know, if you listen to some of my past episodes, I recently went through a bout of depression, really bad depression. And I found that me talking about it, me being open with it, me posting things about it and my struggles actually helped people reach out and start getting the help they needed. And
Yep.
the things they're like, you're saying everything I've been wanting to say. Thank you for saying it. And then now they start talking about it. But it takes somebody for them to see do it, because they
Yes.
don't feel like they feel like they're not strong enough, or they do feel like they're strong enough, but something is holding them back.
Right.
They don't want to be the only one.
Right. And the other thing that's kind of really been, driving me is suicide in the fire service. I've lost a number of coworkers to it. The last one was a few months ago. He was a great guy. I worked with him for a couple of years in Roseland, and I can tell you this. And we had lost contact for a couple of years. He got promoted, I got promoted, and just one of those things that we just never we never stayed in close contact, just here and there. Josh would have never expected it. Would have never guessed it. He was funny. He was a good guy. The last time I talked to him, he was sober. He had stopped drinking for, I want to say about almost 13, 14 months. And which I didn't realize he had a problem, honestly. And then he said, you know what, he got tied into this, I guess you call it a beer program or whatever, where they send you all kinds of beers, once a month, a case of it. He just started doing that and got caught up in it. And well, then he ended up having a seizure one day, and they found a tumor in his brain that was benign, but it sort of affected him, and he lost the ability to do certain things on the fire service. And so he kind of went through a little bit of a depression. I would say, if I were to guess, I would say that he struggled with self-worth. Well, he wound up, killing himself, which really bothers me. And then the other thing is PTSD, and having personally risen above that and becoming victorious over that. It's another thing that I certainly advocate, and advocate people talking about. And like that group discussion I created with victories over stress or traumatic stress, is because I, like you say, it's good for people to talk about. It's good for people to talk about the kind of runs they've been on, and how they've prevented that traumatic experience from crippling them, from taking over their lives, from being enslaved by it. When you're in PTSD, when you look at the neurological perspective of it, Josh, it's really still not well understood. Just like medicine, just like science, conclusions change every day. And there's a lot of different ideas. There's a lot of different perspectives. There's a lot of
Theories. There's a lot of different things out there about
yes,
it.
and one thing that's consistent about medicine is that it's inconsistent. And when you look at neurobiology, they're looking at certain regions of the brain, limbic system, and they're looking at the amygdala, the hippocampus, the areas of the brain that process fear and danger, and the other one is incorporates memory, and then your HPA axis, with your hypothalamus and pituitary adrenal axis, and they're looking at all these things, and they're looking at an imagery, right? They're looking at a functional MRI, and which is great. It's great to try and understand it from a neurological perspective. But one thing that I think is overlooked is the fact that when you look at these areas of the brain that are hypertrophied, or that have been pruned down and shrunk because of recurrent stress, because of recurrent thoughts, thoughts you can't shut off, thoughts that are constantly stimulating these areas of the brain that are causing these changes. So that's one thing that I like to look at and talk about is a lot of that stuff, Josh, is centered around the inner center core is our belief system. And when I talk about belief system, sometimes people think, well, it's not about Christ. Well, no, the belief system that I'm talking about is actually how you perceive that traumatic experience that you went through, whether it's ongoing or that one. Do you feel responsible for it? Do you feel like you could have controlled it? Or are you guilty about it for some reason or another? And it's like, if you were to actually slow things down, set down that PTSD label for a second, step away from it, and then see how you are and see how life could be without it. And then if we were to look at and pinpoint down what cause, or what experience is creating this PTSD symptoms, and look at it, I found it to be very helpful to do that, because if we feel like we're responsible for something, Josh, if we're hanging on to guilt of something, or if we are hanging on to anger of a wrongness, whether it was childhood molestation, rape, or things like that, which I've been dealing with a lot in our practice. If you go back and look at it, and if you start looking at what you believe about it, and you can start setting down your feeling of your responsibility. Start looking at, well, I'm not responsible for that. I wasn't responsible. I couldn't have prevented that. And you start setting these little things down, and you start slowly climbing towards victory, and realizing that that there is hope. And that's my biggest thing, is to instill and bring hope into those situations. And then you start chipping away and getting rid of false fear, which creates these anxieties. And so when you talk to someone who went through a severe rape situation, or if you talk to someone even like yourself or myself, who had a close call, who had a building come down on them, and you just barely got out of the door, and looking at these fears and thinking that, well, that's going to happen tomorrow. That's, I can't prevent that. It's going to happen again. And so now you're constantly in these fears, realizing that that these are just false fears. These are fears that we're thinking about at the moment, creating these initial stress responses that once we look at them, and like this one where we were looking at the situation, one of the clients, where whenever there was a conversation about rape, or whenever there was discussion, she automatically went into this panic. Her heart raced. She couldn't think. She shook. And then we start looking at, well, that's a fear response that really doesn't apply to the here and now, right now, right? It's a memory. And so when we start looking at that memory, we start thinking that and start uncovering the fact that that did happen. That was the past, but we can't let the past run our lives. We can't let the past control the here and now. What we can do is we can learn from it. We can actually look at where we're at now and realize that you are at a position where you are in a more of a preventable position where you actually are taking precautions to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And so the other thing is that one, realizing you weren't responsible for it, you couldn't have controlled it, but now you can take it and learn from it. But at the same time, you now can help others learn from it and teach them how to be responsible, teach them how to be aware of their surroundings, teach them things that they can do to take precautions and prevent that from happening to them. You know what I mean?
It's cool that you're saying that. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's cool
Yeah.
that you're saying that because I've heard that a lot from my therapist, my psychiatrist, my counselors,
Yeah.
that when you're able to take the experience that you went through, and then even though you may still have this trauma and these feelings, when you start helping people deal with their trauma and their feelings that are similar, it actually helps you deal with
Yes.
it. It when you start sharing the experience and start sharing the what you learned from and how to prevent, you start realizing yourself that
Yeah.
okay, now I can start believing these things that I'm telling people for myself as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually a theme that I've seen, with my therapist, and what they're telling me is like, yeah, the more you share, the
Mm-hmm.
actual more you learn about yourself as well. At the same time, helping people deal with what could be similar to what you went through.
Yeah. And
It's a weird phenomenon.
yeah, it is. And it's Josh, it's a sense of control that we truly don't have. It's feeling like that we can control the outcomes of all situations, and we can't. We can do what we can to prevent them. We can take more of a wiser action to things. But we certainly can't have the mindset that we can control uh, things from either happening again, or we can control the outcomes of our actions, because we truly can't. All we can really do is take action. All we can really do is act. But the final outcome of our actions really aren't up to us. We can't control it. And so that's one that helped me get over a lot of the things that I felt that I had or should have control over, which is just unrealistic in most cases. And that those are the things that I would certainly give to God. And at the same time, I would actually take those experiences now and help others overcome and help others reach victory as well as I did. And we're not supposed to lean on our own understanding, right? And I try not to do that. And so I actually take scripture and I apply it to what I'm saying. I apply it and I bring the truth into it. And if you don't mind, if I read this, do you mind if I read?
No, I don't mind at all.
Okay.
I don't mind at all.
So here's one. It's the New Living Translation. It's 2 Corinthians 1, 3-7. And this kind of comes into play. So all praise to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. God is our merciful Father and the source of all comfort. So he comforts us in all of our troubles so that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. For the more we suffer for Christ, the more God will shower us with comfort through Christ. Even when we are weighted down with troubles, it is for your comfort and is for your salvation. For when we ourselves are comforted, we will certainly comfort you, then you can patiently endure the same things that we suffer. And to me, and that was Paul's writings to Corinthians, basically saying that um, when we try to help someone, it is imperative that we ourselves have experienced it, that we ourselves um, have found victory, that we have walked that path, that we know the obstacles, that we have an idea of what is going to be encountered. And so I like to, again, I like to bring the truth into it, and not just speak at it from a human understanding. That's, it's his understanding. Is it
It's
like,
funny. It's
yeah,
funny how that transition uh, travels through both
yes,
scripture and, I mean, because we just talked about it. My therapist
yes,
was telling me the same exact thing. My
yeah,
therapist is saying sharing your experience and talking about it and being open about it is not only beneficial for you, but beneficial for everybody that hears it or anybody that might be going through it. And then here's the scripture telling you the exact same
yes,
thing.
awesome, yeah,
It's crazy how
yeah,
they're both intermingled. The
yeah,
science, the science about it
hmm,
is the same thing that the scripture is saying about it.
right,
And that's why I really wanted to talk to you, because when I
yeah,
talked to you yesterday, you were binding those things, and it's that whole people thinking science and religion can't be the same. Well,
yeah,
here it is. There is right there.
yeah,
That is your
yeah, and
perfect example.
yes, and the other thing, getting back to the neurobiology of it, is we are learning current today's traditional mainstream science is even learning through neurobiology of neuroplasticity, meaning that what was once thought that your neurogeneration is what it is, that your nerves can't regenerate, your synapses are what they are, is wrong. It's false. And so what they're finding is neuroplasticity, meaning that once we are able to work on our belief systems, once we are able to change our way of thinking, to change our thoughts, to get rid of these recurrent traumatic thoughts of our experiences, not let our experiences and our past run our lives, get rid of this false fear, they are actually showing changes in the brain, changes in the regions of the brain that are constantly being bombarded by these traumatic thoughts and this constant stimulation, this false fear. But once we get rid of those, Josh, our brain actually start changing.
It's
That,
rewiring itself. It
yes,
rewires itself.
yes,
CBTs, cognitive behavioral
yeah,
therapies,
yeah,
those are what are being taught now for people that have PTSD, depression, and
yeah,
stuff like that. Is every time we have this type of thought, let's feel the feeling, but
yeah,
don't live in the feeling. And
right,
you have to learn how to do that. You have to
right,
practice that cognitive behavioral therapy.
yeah,
And it's so crazy that this is somewhat of a new idea or new thought or new what's the word I'm looking at, new observation that's being made,
sure, yeah,
that we have the power to literally rewire our brains.
yes,
However, we got to find that strength within
hmm,
ourselves to do so.
yeah,
And sometimes that strength is found in your belief, your,
hmm,
like you said, your belief, more, not just your religious belief, not just
yeah, no,
your
right,
faith belief, but
yes.
also the belief in yourself.
Yes, and that's the belief that we talk about. Not only we intermix faith belief, but we also intermix just what you personally believe about the situation, the circumstance, the past, the uncontrollable future. You know what I mean? What do you believe about that? It's not just faith belief. It's the true cognitive belief about situations. You know?
Your perception of the reality that you are putting off in your head. What
Yes,
is it
sure.
that, what's that reality that you believe is true? You always hear that saying whenever there's a story being told between two people, there's their story,
Yep.
there's the other person's story, and then the truth somewhere in the middle, you
Yeah.
know? And it's almost like that. You got to be able to find that middle ground within yourself.
Right.
You can't believe the cognitive distortion that is PTSD or depression. But then at the same time, you can't 100% believe this happy-go-lucky fairy tale idea of what you want it to be. You
Yep.
have to find that middle ground and be able to really, truly tell yourself, okay, I need to, this is my starting point. This is where I
Yes.
need to start to fix myself, is that middle
Yes.
ground, that starting point.
Yep. Yeah. And that is awesome.
Yeah. How long have you, we're going to go back a little bit. You do
Yeah.
have your PhD.
Yes.
And what was it again exactly?
In Christian counseling, I went through the Colorado Theological Seminary.
Okay. And then you also do have some certification in schooling in mental health science.
Yes. So I have an undergrad, I have a bachelor's in behavioral science and a master's in public safety.
Okay. I want to get into what you actually have going on. We went through a lot of good stuff and how the mind works with faith and with the science of the actual mind. I want to kind of turn this and go into what you have going on now. You have a colleague that you're working with and trying to identify stresses that are related to the service, the fire service, first responders.
Yes.
Where is he from? What is he tied to? And then how did you guys get that going? If you can explain to the audience exactly what's going on with all that.
Sure. Yeah. So Jeff Dill, him and I worked together in a fire department years ago. And he's now since been retired, but he's been traveling around and studying PTSD and fire service. And he's been traveling around looking at suicides in the fire service and PTSD. And so when him and I reconnected, I kind of talked to him about other things that are causing these stressors. And one of them that I wanted to talk about was members who are basically don't get a chance to do what they're trained, right? And where that came from is I remember myself, and I went through it. I still went through it with over 32 years. If I missed a fire, if the truck went out and we didn't go out, I would just get frustrated,
Mm-hmm.
But what drove that was I read an article about that was written by an Army Ranger who was younger, but he was trained. He was a Ranger, and all he wanted to do was he wanted to go to battle. But his unit never got sent to battle, and he was talking about how never being able to go to war was almost as stressful and damaging as going, because he trained for it. He has his mindset, his heart set. He's anticipating, and it never happened. So he was never able to put this training to work to even get some sort of self credibility, some sort of assurance that he can do it, some sort of sense of value, and so it was a great article. And so I applied it to the fire service. I'm like, well, man, I said, well, maybe that can certainly be a part of what's happening in the fire service with stress. And it's never talked about. It's certainly overlooked. And so we have now that survey that's going out to collect the data on members that are feeling stressed when they're not able to do what they were trained to do. And we don't have all the data in yet, but we're working on that.
And that's an interesting concept, because we're always told that, or it's a general thought, really, I think, that if you're not seeing the bad shit, if you're not having to deal with the stresses of, applying your skills, not having to do CPR on a 3-year-old, not having to pull somebody out of a fire, not having to see a burning body.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not doing those things, then why would you be stressed? Why would you have, depression? Why would you have any type of mental health issue at all when you're looking at it from the flip side, in that you have all this training and wanting to really apply what you've been trained and what you've been wanting to do. This is something that you're dedicating your life to. And now all of a sudden you have all this stuff and you're not doing it. Can that be a cause of mental health issues? Can that be a cause of stress. And you're right. I don't think that's not thought of at all,
No.
really,
Yeah.
because we're always taught, well, if you don't have to
Yeah.
see it, then you have nothing to worry about. You have nothing to
Right.
be stressed about.
Yeah.
Well, now I have this sense of worthlessness. I have this
Yes.
sense of just being here doing nothing. And
Right.
that feeling sucks too.
Right.
That feeling,
Yeah. And I had a coworker that he was also in the military, and he was still, I think, in National Guard or whatever, and he never had a chance to go to battle. But when he wears his fatigues, he was having people saying, "Oh, thank you for your service" and all that kind of stuff. He's got the patches on his shoulder, and he said, "Brett," he goes, "but I feel guilty. I walk into the airport and I feel nothing but guilt because I didn't go." You know what I mean? So he's like, I feel like I'm wearing this uniform,
almost
and it's
almost similar
false.
to survivor's guilt, almost, I would
Yes.
say.
Yeah.
I would
Right.
almost say that
Yeah.
like I should have been able to do this. Just because I'm wearing the uniform doesn't mean I am. And it's the same thing
Right.
in the fire service, right? The general public sees a firefighter that makes this spectacular save,
Yeah.
and then we go out into the public, they see us in our uniform, and they're like, "Thank you for what you do. We saw that firefighter do this." And you're like, "Yeah, but that wasn't me. I
Right.
didn't do it." And
Right.
it's like you feel like this sense of could
Inadequacy.
have been me. Yeah, it
Yeah.
could have been
Yeah.
me, but it wasn't. I mean, thank
Yeah.
you for appreciating it. And yeah, I
Right.
would have done it if I
Right.
was there, but I didn't.
Yeah.
And so you're like, how do I
Right.
say thank you without feeling like I really didn't do anything?
Right.
You don't
There's
feel like that thanks. You don't feel like
Yeah.
you deserve it.
Right. You want to be able to put that badge of honor on, or have that battle scar to say I've been there. And when you're not, it poses a lot of stress, and so we're looking at that data.
What's there was a website that he has that
Yeah.
you guys are getting to what's the website? And I'm sorry, I should have had it written down in front of me.
And
I
me
know
too,
it's
because I just
PTSD study, and
it just slipped my mind.
give me a second. Oh, here it is.
Yeah.
Firefighter Behavioral Health Alliance,
Health Alliance. Yes.
fbha.org for all our
Yeah.
listeners out there. Go check that out. They have
Yeah.
something really, really cool. They got workshops. They're doing studies, and the idea that they're putting out there and what they're trying to figure out for all of us are better ways for us to cope with the job, both with the critical incident stress
Yeah.
and the lack thereof,
Yeah.
because that seems like that can be a stress too.
Right. Right. Well, you know what, too, Josh, is that there's a reason. There's a reason why suicides are still climbing. There's a reason why it hasn't subsided. There's a reason why it's not going down. There's a reason why there's been more and more diagnosis of post-traumatic injury or post-traumatic exposure symptoms, and there's a reason for it. And I think that we just and like you and I were talking about the other day is because research that's being done on a lot of these cases and a lot of these situations and issues, the crosshairs are on the same target. They're not looking at different potential precursors, potential causes for some of these, symptom development and people who actually go through with suicide. We're all looking at the same thing instead of backing up and looking at different reasons and different causes. And so that's kind of what Jeff and I are trying to do, is try to uncover that. The other research that I did, which was part of my dissertation, uh, was looking at the potential association between having a strong spiritual balance in your life and developing and experiencing the emotional, psychological side effects of this job. I put out a survey about 2 years ago while I was going to school, and it took over a year to get these responses back. And I got 577 responses, which is a pretty good number. I like using the number. It's a good representation of the fire service, because there aren't many departments that have more than 500 members, and so it's a real good representation. And so what I found just in that study of the data was those who were diagnosed with having a diagnosis of PTSD, not people who may be experiencing symptoms that weren't diagnosed or didn't seek help, but the members who were actually diagnosed were 8.6%. So 8.6% of that 577 had a diagnosis of PTSD. And then I went further just in PTSD, and I looked at how many of those had faith, how many of those were believers in God, how many of those were followers of God, and meaning that they didn't believe in God, or they believe in God, but they don't practice it. They don't go to church regularly. They don't practice it. They're just a believer. Mm-hmm. And 68% of those of those with PTSD were either non-believers or non-followers. And I'll show you those numbers, or I'll put those numbers in a scenario in a second. And so another category was emotional psychological diagnosis, and 19% of those had a diagnosis of that. 90% of those were either non-believers or non-followers. A divorce. So 28% of the 577 experienced a divorce. 63% were non-believers, non-followers. And when I put all together, I put all the non-believers and non-followers in one category just to see. And so out of the 577, 56% were non-believers and non-followers. So when I put that in a scenario, so I put in a scenario basically similar to Chicago, 5,000 members. So when I put those numbers in a scenario, is where it really kind of shows the power and really kind of shows the significance of these percentages. And so PTSD at 8.6% out of 5,000 members, you'll get 430 members potentially diagnosed with PTSD. That's a big number, 530 members, right? Mm-hmm. And so out of those, 292 were non-believers and non-followers. So 68% of them, right? So that would give 292 members out of those 430 of being non-believers, non-followers. Emotional, psychological, 19% of 5,000, 950 members. So those are pretty large numbers when you look at the percentage-wise. Mm-hmm. So 950 members could potentially have a psychological diagnosis. 855 of those, so almost nearly 90% of those were non-believers, non-followers. So with the divorce rate, the 28% added to the 5,000, 1,400 members of potentially a department of the size of 5,000, 1,400 members had experienced or could potentially have experienced a divorce. And 882 of those were non-believers and non-followers. So if I put together the non-believers and non-followers, the 56%, 2,800 members out of the 5,000 members would be non-believers and non-followers. And so when I looked at that data, to me, it was like, it's not showing causality, but what it is to me is it's showing a promise, it's showing some sort of a significant data, something.
There's definitely a correlation.
Yes. And so my push after this data is, okay, what if we were able to improve the spiritual health of these members? Could we potentially lower the cases of PTSD? Could we potentially lower the cases of psychological diagnosis and experiences? And could we potentially lower divorce rates? And I truly believe that we could,
Well, the numbers show that you could. If you thought of it strictly statistically, strictly scientifically, the numbers show that in theory, yes, absolutely it could.
Right.
And if faith can have that much of a change, even when you broke it down scientifically, having faith can change our mental health, can change our relationships just within the service. If it can change that, then yes, that's definitely something that may need to be practiced or pushed or at least taught. Somebody needs to take that step and start being that, start advocating for it. We're not going to force anybody because
no, of course,
faith, just like any other belief, is a personal choice. But putting it out there and allowing them to learn and question and then make an educated choice, right?
Yeah.
Because we're tying science into faith, but making an educated choice on what they choose to believe, and then hopefully choosing that faith route. Just the numbers will show that their lives could improve dramatically. I mean,
Hmm.
we're talking better than half. If you can even just take you half of the non-believers and they become believers, you're going to cut down that 90% to 45% of
Sure.
non-believers. And now, now, you're going to have 45% of people have better idea, a better avenue
Hmm.
of not having a mental health issue.
The numbers are impressive, and there's certainly no guarantees. And again,
No,
it doesn't prove causality, but it does bring some legitimate, reasonable argument.
but all theories, all hypotheses start with a reasonable
Yes.
expectation,
Yes.
So,
Yeah. I seen it myself. Not for it to be as just be anecdotal. But I've seen it in a lot of other cases as well. Seen it in my own practice. I've seen it, coworkers and family members. I have a friend of mine that is a friend of the family. He's a retired Army Ranger, and he had over 300 combat jumps, and he was blown up. His leg was shattered by an RPG, and he had to leave the service. And a super super sharp guy. He's an engineer degree. He's probably one of the smartest guys I've met. And he told me, and he attempted suicide 3 times and couldn't deal with living in the general population. He was angry at people after going to missions and doing what he did, and he came back. He would be out in public walking around and just being angry at people for either, I would say, taken for granted what he himself put himself through. If people would, if they dropped garbage on the ground, or if they weren't doing, if they weren't being respectable citizens, it would fire him off. So he had a hard time adjusting in the real world, and he tried offing himself 3 times, and he said the only thing, Josh, the only thing that saved his life was God. He walked into an office one day. He was going to talk to someone about some sort of a business proposition, and he seen a book on the shelf, and he opened it up and he started reading it. Changed his life. He actually started working at a church. He started becoming a youth minister, and he said it changed his life. And I have several stories like that, but his is the most powerful to me because of what he went through. And so I like to take that, Josh, and as his testimony, I have my testimony, as there being hope, and there being power and accepting Christ in your life, and I want to be an advocate of that.
and I think you're doing an amazing job doing that, Brett. The fact that, and then I said it already like 3-4 times already, the fact that you're able to do it, but not only do it in a way where it's faith, 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 but you have a way of doing it that allows people that may have questions or that may question faith. You also have numbers to back up what
Yeah,
you're saying,
sure.
which I think can definitely help bridge the gap between people that have a question about faith but believe more in science. And then
Hmm.
you're also bridging that gap of people that believe more in science
Hmm.
and question faith,
Yes.
and so you're bridging that gap between the two with what you're putting out there. And I think that's very, very, very cool and very, what's what I'm looking for? It's very rare that you see
Yes.
that,
Sure.
because I think what turns off a lot of people from religion sometimes is that they get faith pushed on them, and it's only faith.
Hmm.
There's no realistic backup. There's no numbers. There's no studies, and it's just faith, 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 faith. And then you have the other side that's all science, and it's like,
Right.
well, you can't have faith because science says this and science says that, science is this. But when you are able to bridge that gap and show a correlation between the two, like like you did with the Corinthians,
Yeah.
with Paul's letter to the Corinthians, it it puts it into a perspective that not a lot of people that are on one side or the other have ever thought about before. Either
Sure.
because they want to believe their faith is so strong that to hear those numbers doesn't mean anything, or their ideas on science is so strong to hear the idea of faith doesn't mean anything, but you're tying them together and you found a way to show that correlation where people can really truly make an educated decision about their belief system.
Sure.
And that is something that is, I have found very difficult to find in people, in ministers, in priests, in advocates for faith. And on the other side, it's hard for people to really advocate the other when they're just talking about science, because when there's a question on science, and all you have to do to ask somebody in science is just keep asking why.
Sure.
And sooner or later, they're not going to be able to explain the why.
Right.
And then with faith, that's the cool thing with faith, is the why is explained through your faith.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so it's cool that you can tie those together. You're giving an answer to the end game on the science end, but you're also giving an answer to the questions on the faith end with the science. And
Sure.
that is just, man, I praise you for doing that. That
Yeah.
is unbelievable. I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping this up, Brett. We went through some great information, and I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, being open and honest with your past and
Sure.
with the mental health that you went through and your journey into finding the faith that you did. And then I want to thank you for being an advocate and taking the time to go and study and find that information and really truly understand the faith and science side of everything, and then putting it out there and sharing it for people, because your end game is to help people in the fire service, to help civil service members. And we need more people like that, that are looking at mental health, that are looking at the, not just mental health, but the physical health of our members. And you found another avenue to do that through faith, and showing that faith can make a huge difference in both aspects of that. And that is just, it's amazing. It's awesome. And again, thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you, Josh. Thanks for having me on here. I think it's awesome. It's fabulous.
Yeah, I
I'm
really
so
enjoyed the
excited about it.
conversation. I
Yeah.
really did enjoy the conversation. It's been great so far. But when I start wrapping it up, I usually ask 3 questions. The first one's a little 2-part question. It can spark another 15, 20-minute conversation. It could be 5 minutes, no big deal. No right or wrong answers. But my first question to you is, if Mr. Brett Snow had the podcast, okay, say you're the one that had the podcast, you're the one that's hosting, but your guest was Mr. Brett Snow. What is something that you would have asked him, or a piece of information you would have liked for yourself to share that I may have not touched on or asked?
Okay. I would probably want to ask, I think I would probably want to ask him, Josh, if he takes any responsibility in what happened in his life.
And would you answer that?
I would say yes. I would say there was a point where I fought it, but I do take responsibility for it. I think I do. I realize that when you get caught up in the fire service and you start conforming to its traditions and its ways, and you let it grab onto you, when you let the fire service become a lifestyle, when you let it become your life, it will, and if you don't understand it, it will ruin every good thing in your life if you let it. And to me, I let it, because I identified with it. I wrote on it. I let it become my lifestyle rather than an occupation. Um, and I could tell you that I take responsibility for a lot of things that happen in my life.
That's actually something that I think a lot of people find hard to do sometimes, is taking responsibility for what happens in their lives. Now, what happens to them, sometimes they can't really can control, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but how you think about it and how you deal with it, that is within your control. And that is what you have to take responsibility of. I always like to say that the fire service is part of our lives. It is an occupation, but it is part of who we are, because if it wasn't, we wouldn't do the job. There's something in us that allows us to do this job, that we find that we want to do this job. We find that we can't do anything else because there's something in us that we can't see ourselves doing anything else other than being involved in the fire service some way, somehow. I think for me, in my personal opinion, is that you have to take responsibility in finding the balance.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take responsibility in finding the balance. If the fire service is something that you define your life on, be careful to not let it define everything, because then you are going to lose out on the personal behind the truck, behind the station door, behind the bay door
Yeah.
when you go home. Don't let it become so cumbersome, so involved that you forget that you're also a human being that needs to experience different things to be happy,
Right.
because you're not always going to get what the fire service can give you when you got to go home. You're
No,
not
it's
always going to get
no.
what
Right.
you're just not. You're not going to get that because you got to go home. It is still a
Yeah.
job. You can't be there 24/7. You can't marry it.
Right.
So you have to find that balance. And I think
Yeah.
it's, from my personal opinion, is you have to be responsible in finding the balance
Yes.
in that.
Yeah,
And
it's definitely an order of priority, and it's also a good mindset to have that it's not the job that makes us who we are; it's who we are that drives us to do the job. And if it's the job that makes us who we are, then who are we when we retire? That could be very crippling if we have that mindset. Um, the other thing is an order of priority, which I didn't have for many, many, many years, most of my career, basically, is um, is God, family, and then self, right? Then the job. God, family, self, and then the job. So um, I was job, self, family. I don't know if God was in there all the time. Circumstantial, maybe when I needed it, right?
mhm.
And I can tell you that that was the foundation that I was riding on, and it was very weak and crumbly, and it fell a few times, but I didn't really realize why.
Mhm.
I know now.
I'm going to challenge your priority list a little
Yeah.
bit. I want to say it's God, self, family, then the job.
Hmm.
I wouldn't put the family above self. And here's the reason why. If you're not good with yourself, how can you be good for your family? And it's just, and I've said it before in other podcasts, and we get trained in it in the fire service. What's the order of safety? Look out for you, look out for your brothers and sisters, and then you look out for the public, right? Because if you're not good, how the hell are you going to help your brothers and sisters? And then how the hell are you guys going to help the community? Right.
Right.
So I would challenge your priority in that, because let's put it this way: if you put your family before you, there may be some type of resentment because you are still not good with you.
Hmm.
So I think because you became good for you, Brett, you became good for your family.
Right.
So
And the
I would
reason why
challenge that.
sure. The reason why I put that in that order, Josh, is because if I put myself before my family, then I'm going to the golf clubs, I'm going to the bars, I'm going to hang out with friends, I'm picking up, extra shifts. But if I put my family first, then it helps me keep my priorities in order. It helps me keep my decisions about them and not myself. It keeps me from selfishness and puts
Okay.
me more in a position of selflessness. You know what I mean?
And
And so
and
that's,
hearing
yeah,
it that way, that makes sense. I was
sure.
looking at it more on the whole mental health and
Yeah. Oh, of course.
self-faith aspect,
Hmm.
because you have to be okay with you, right?
Hmm.
I'm not saying be selfish when I put
Oh,
the
no, of
self
course.
first. I'm saying
Yeah. Yes.
you need to be okay with your mental health. You need
Hmm.
to know that you're worthy of you,
Yeah.
because if you don't feel that you're worthy of you,
Hmm.
how is your family ever going to feel that you're worthy for them? Or how are
Sure.
you going to feel that you're worthy of your family? You
Hmm.
have to feel worthy within yourself. And then once you feel that, then you can really give of yourself to your family,
Hmm.
you know? And so hearing it the way you explained it, that makes sense, right? I get that
Yeah.
part. But in my explanation, it's just
Hmm.
a different line of thinking is
Sure.
all. It's not so much a selfish thing as much as it is being in an okay state of mind, being in uh, I'm good with me, I love me state of
Hmm.
mind, so I can love others.
Yeah.
So
No, I get it. Yes, that's good too. It's kind of like the whole being on the airplane thing with the oxygen mask drop. Put yours
yes,
on first before.
exactly.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
very
yes,
much so.
exactly.
Your perspective is understandable too. So.
Yeah. My second to last question to you, Brett, is it's actually allowing you to ask me any question that
Hmm.
you would like, anything you'd like to know. There's no right or wrong answer. If I cannot answer it, I will respectfully tell you, sorry, I can't.
Hmm.
However, I'm usually pretty much an open book. I don't really have a whole lot of shame. So shoot
Hmm.
away. If there's any question that you would like to ask me,
Hmm.
now's your chance.
Yeah, I think one thing I would like to ask, and I actually even was talking to my wife about it, was when we have discussions about depression and anxiety and you know anger and other emotions that we go through. A lot of times we talk about the emotion. A lot of times we talk about the fight with the emotion or the fight of what we're going through and the battles that we go through to keep ourselves stable, keep ourselves on our own feet, um, and to not become enslaved by it. But one thing that tends to be overlooked, Josh, is uh, what's the cause of all that? Like, if someone was to say that they're battling with, uh, addiction, or they're battling with something, well, what was causing that? Like, what happened to you that put you in that position, that put you at that level, or at that place in your life? And so sometimes we don't talk about the cause of that place. We just talk about the place. I know that you had talked about um, experiencing bouts of depression and stuff. Um, what what do you feel may have been some of your causes, or a cause if it's just one?
So I'm actually still dealing with it. I noticed a change about a year ago within myself. I started noticing I didn't feel right.
Hmm.
Uh, I had something happen to me when I was a child. However, I never brought it up because I just didn't want to.
Hmm.
But going through therapy and everything, I found that a lot of my life has been dictated because of it. I think what happens is when we experience a trauma or excitement, a trauma, something that just sticks with us, that
Hmm.
affects us in a way that at the time we couldn't explain. And we had this feeling, right? A lot of the times when you talk to people that have depression, something happened to them that this feeling came over them and they didn't know how to separate it from everything else in their lives. That idea became who they thought they were, right?
Hmm.
So now that feeling gets tied to everything else in their lives.
Hmm.
And that's what happened for me is the depression defined who I was. Instead of
Okay.
actually realizing I was not that, I allowed my sadness, I allowed my depression, my anxiety, and everything I felt those things brought into my head, I allowed myself to feel like, well, this is just who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I would tie it to everything. I looked for self-worth in things, in people, and everything and anything else that wasn't me.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody didn't like me, it must mean because I'm a horrible person. If my wife didn't tell me she loved me one day, even though it could have been just an innocent,
Mm-hmm.
she's married to me. I should know she loves me, but she didn't tell me. So therefore, does she still love me? If she doesn't still love me, then if she does love me, is she saying it because she thinks she has to, or is it because
Mm-hmm.
she really feels that way? Like, I questioned everything. I was self-sabotaging everything because I had this idea in my head that I was undeserving of. And so I tied that depression to everything. It
Okay.
defined everything. That feeling defined me.
Mm-hmm.
And because it defined me, anything and everything that was good in my life. Don't get me wrong, I had good times in my life. I had good experiences. I have a loving family. I have two beautiful children. I have a beautiful wife. I have an amazing job. All these things that would make somebody think, well, how could you have this idea of
Sure.
yourself? Well, none of those things mattered because I felt undeserving of.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I know I worked my at like I logically knew I worked my ass off for these things and I work hard for these things and I should be appreciative of. And because I did these things, I am deserving of it. That didn't compute in my head. In my head, it was no, there's something else here.
Okay.
There's this, it just gets tied. It
Uh-huh.
gets tied to everything.
Okay.
And even though the action, like you were saying, that one thing, instead of
Mm-hmm.
just talking about the sadness, right?
Sure.
And we just talk about what made us sad.
Yeah.
I think people forget that sometimes those things get tied to everything else. It's that whole being able to compartmentalize
Mm-hmm.
the feeling with the action instead of allowing that feeling to just carry on.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's what we say in there's a saying that it's okay to not be okay in the
Sure.
mental health community. It's okay to not be okay. It's just not okay to stay there. And
Exactly. Right.
I didn't know that, and I
Yeah.
forgot that, and it just I stayed there
Right.
because
Right.
that's what I thought it was. It's just who I am. And it wasn't until September 20th where a I had a really bad breakdown. And the way
Mm-hmm.
I explain suicidal ideations and
Mm-hmm.
suicide is there's these different levels of suicidal ideation. There's just thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
There's standing on the ledge, which is the actual, you know, uh, planning,
Yeah.
and then there's the jumping, which is the actual attempt.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was literally heels just touching the ledge. That
Mm-hmm.
was like it was bad. It was a
Okay.
bad situation. And it wasn't until that situation to where I finally realized, you know what, I need to get some help.
Mm-hmm.
And, it takes a lot. It's not just because I am a God fearing man. I believe in Jesus and everything else.
Sure. Of course.
But I also knew at the same time I couldn't do it on faith alone. I needed
Mm-hmm.
help mentally. And so
Mm-hmm.
now I'm on medications and now I see a therapist. I am in marriage counseling and I am totally okay to say all these things now because
Yeah. Of course.
these things are normal.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to be able to admit that you're trying to do better.
Mm-hmm.
And so that my answer to your basic question is that when we talk about expressing these feelings and we only tie them to sometimes that one thing, and the reason why it just keeps going on and why it affects us so
Mm-hmm.
much is because we forget to leave that feeling with the action,
Mm-hmm.
and we allow that feeling to carry on into everything else.
Sure.
It's hard for people to compartmentalize and just allow the feeling to stay with the action. I think is what it is.
Yeah, no, it's good. And I think in our line of work too, Josh, is it's very difficult to put your finger on one thing because it's compounded. It's compounded over a long period of time. And
Yeah, you really have to break it down.
right,
You would
yeah,
have to break down every time you felt a certain emotion. You have to be able to compartmentalize. And it's hard for people to do because sometimes it's just you get that feeling and it sticks with you. And then now everything that happens, that feeling's tied to. It doesn't matter if something good happens because you still have this feeling from this trauma that is just tied. It's
right,
stuck. You can't
yeah,
keep it with the trauma. It stays with you.
right,
And I think that's why people
yeah.
carry it. I
And
think I truly believe that.
right, and you hit the head too when we talk about the place that we may find ourselves in. We may have not had any control of getting there, right? We may not have done anything to find ourselves in this position, but we do have, right? We do have the choice. We do have the decision. We do have the free will to not stay there, right?
Correct.
We can decide to not stay there, and that is huge. It's very important.
You have the strength inside you. You just got to find it. Just got to find it.
Yeah.
All right, Brett. My last question to you, brother, and that was a great question. Thank you, by the way, for asking that. I hope I answered it.
No, it's good.
Somewhat logically.
Yeah, it's good.
My last question to you is: the show is called "What Makes Us Fire," and of course, I'm talking to a retired firefighter, so it's easy for you to kind of understand. But it's also more of a statement as well. It's not just a question. I'm sharing guests and people that make us fire. These are the people that are fire, that are civil service. But my question to you is, what do you think it is that makes us fire, that makes us civil service, that makes us willing to make the decision to make a sacrifice of ourselves for others?
I would have to say that for the most part, I can even say from a faith-based perspective, that we are all given unique gifts. We're all given unique gifts and abilities. And I think once we tap into that, once we find and merge passion with ability, we find ourselves where we're at. And just because we have a passion for something doesn't mean we have the ability, and vice versa. And so I think what sparks people to get into this line of work is, one, to either have a passion for it at first, which I think that's usually the initial, and then they realize that they actually have the ability for it too. I think it's divine. I think it's God graced. The other thing too is, this job isn't for everyone. Now, I think it's important to also say that too, is just because we have the passion for it doesn't mean that we have the ability, or it doesn't mean that that we're going to have what it takes for the longevity of this job. And so that's also important too, is to realize and understand that. And I think that what makes us fire, like you're saying, is truly humility and the drive to want, we can even say want to help others, but I think the drive to make this a better place, to make this a better place to live, make this a better world. And if that is the only way that we can do it, it's our only contribution. I think we find ourselves doing that. I think we find satisfaction in doing that. I think we find self-worth doing that. And I think that it's also important to know that if we have the ability to do it, that it's certainly it's almost an obligation to do that. I think it's important. And so I'm not sure if I answered that question as well as you wanted to, but I think that
there's
for
no
me,
right or wrong answer, man.
No, yeah, for me, it's just honestly, I didn't know. I didn't know that I was designed for it until I tried it. And like we said before, it was military. I was wanting to go special forces. This was the next best thing, and I just I fell in love with it, and I realized that I had both a passion and ability to do it. And I think once you do that, then we, just like we are the church, we are the fire service. We start making fire service what it is. And the only way to do that is to stand together, stand firm, help each other out, lift each other up, don't tear people down. And that's who we are. And we make the fire service by giving back and by learning from other people's mistakes, by learning from our own lessons learned and sharing those, knowing that we are human, knowing that we don't know everything, knowing that we haven't experienced everything, and be humble. So stay humble, stay kind, have your self-control, and do our part. And that's the big thing, is to do our part. Strive for excellence. We're not perfect. We never will be perfect. And to know and realize that level of accomplishment of being perfect is unachievable. And it's certainly unachievable under our own power. But anyway, I think we make the fire service, Josh. And I think what you're doing is helping others share their experiences and hearing other people's experiences is certainly a strong part of that.
I appreciate that, man. And like I said, there is no right or wrong answer. And I love your analogy with not even an analogy, really what it is, finding the correlation between passion and ability, because I'm going to write that down. Just because you have the passion doesn't mean you have the ability. And just because you have the ability doesn't mean you have the passion. And I love that saying, because I think for us as firefighters and civil service in general, when we make that decision to make that sacrifice of ourselves, because it is a sacrifice, we have found that we had a passion for it and then the ability. And I think for most civil service, like you said, it was the passion first.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of people that have a passion for it. They go through the fire academy and realize, well, shit, I don't have the ability to do this. I really wish I could, but I can't.
Sure.
It's very rare that you find somebody that's, I can do it, but I just don't want to. Right. It's very rare that you find that. I think it's like you said, it's people that want to do this, do it. And then they find that they're either really good at it or maybe they're not so good at it. So definitely, sure. I think the passion comes first.
Yeah,
but man, I loved it. Holy crap! You are the longest interview I've had. Brett, nice. Where can the listeners and the audience, where can the What Makes Us Fire family follow you? How can they contact you and help you out with what you're doing?
Yeah. Okay. So. Well, of course, I'm on Facebook, but I have an online faith-based counseling ministry. It's called Surviving Life Ministries. And the website is sl-ministries.com. And you know what? We wanted to certainly stay faith-based. We wanted to be remote so that we can help members and help others coast to coast. We didn't want to be regional. We didn't want to be locked into a state border. And so we live in Florida and our services are online. And so we can help, really we can help people worldwide. And so that was important for us, is to be able to reach out as far as we can. Yeah. And so the other thing too is we also focus and target not just the first responders and their families. We do marriage awareness, whereas we help couples learn about themselves. And we do that with temperament. We do a temperament analysis and we find each other's temperaments and we talk to them about their needs and desires. And we do a side-by-side, and it's really fun to do. We have a good time doing that. And so there's other things that we do. And
my wife and I might be contacting you soon.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, I tell you what, Josh, I've learned a lot about myself, and my wife and I did it. And we know so much about each other now, about their social desires, their desires to take on responsibility and what they truly desire and want in their close relationships, in their physical life, in their marriage. And it's so interesting when you put them side by side. They're graphed. It's a graph analysis, and it really gives you a good picture of both of you together. And it's so fun to do,
For the audience, again, the website is sl-ministries.com. I also want to have the audience go to FFBHA, Firefighter Behavioral Health Alliance. It is an alliance that Mr. Brett Snow is with his colleague, and they are trying to really find some avenues for us in dealing with behavioral health within the service. So you guys, please go check that out. There's some surveys that you can take. There's a self-assessment. There's some suicide reporting, some good information for all of us to really learn from. And, if you see the quiz on any of my social media platforms, please help him out. Take not the quiz, I said a quiz, the survey, help him out, take that survey. The more numbers he has, the better information they can put out. And if you have any questions about the survey, or if you're leery, contact him at sl-ministries.com, also at ffbha.org. Brett, brother, man, thank you so much for coming on the show. We talked about a lot, and we got really deep. And I think anybody that listens to the entire episode, which I am going to advocate when I do the intro, they are going to learn some amazing things. You guys, Brett is a man doing things that I think not a lot of us have the tenacity or strength to do, but the fact that he does will give us that push. And I want to thank him for that. I really do.
Thank you, Josh. And again, it was an honor to be here. It was an honor to talk to you and learn about you and meet you. And I just want to say, God bless you and your endeavors, and keep going with what you're doing. And I hope the best for you and your family. And thank you for having this platform for people like myself and others to share their stories and to share their testimony. It's very important.
I really appreciate it, man. And I thank you for being willing to share, because it does take somebody special to be able to be open and share. So
sure.
What Makes Us Fire Family, Brett Snow again. Brett, you go ahead and wave bye to the audience, because this also goes on YouTube.
Yeah. Nice. Good.
What Makes Us Fire Family, Brett Snow again. Thank you very much, sir. You guys get out there, have fun, stay safe, and remember, just like Brett Snow said, and myself, let's show some love and peace and compassion out there in the world. You never know what somebody might be going through, and you never know if you might be the difference.
Absolutely right. All right. Thanks for listening.
All right, everybody. That was Mr. Brett Snow, minister and science extraordinaire. I loved how he tied together using statistics, mathematical science, and basically just the science of brain, and then showed the correlation between that and faith. We all find something that allows us to move on, to push through. Brett found faith, but on top of that, he used the science with how the mind works to understand his faith even more. It's pretty extraordinary. And I think we all learn something about that. Whether it's that faith or not, but believing in something, believing in yourself, and then knowing what it takes to make those changes. Therapy, cognitive behavioral practices, all those things can help you become a better you, so you can be a better you for everyone else in your life. I want to thank Mr. Brett Snow again for coming on to the What Makes Us Fire podcast and sharing his story with all of you, the What Makes Us Fire family. Y'all, please remember to go follow What Makes Us Fire on all the social media platforms with the tag at What Makes Us Fire on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok. Also, you can follow What Makes Us Fire on YouTube with What Makes Us Fire space podcast, where you can see the faces behind the voices. And of course, please like and share and leave a comment and subscribe to any of the platforms that you are listening to the show on. It would be greatly appreciated. It would be much loved. You guys, we are growing this family into something beautiful and amazing, and I can't thank you all enough for it. What Makes Us Fire Family? I love you. Have fun. Stay safe. Get out there. And you already know, so I'm not going to say it. Much love.